everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the altar again, and this time we are here with Chris of the Almighty Ahab. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime, man, anytime. It's so awesome to have you here. The new album, The Coral Tombs, definitely one of my most anticipated albums for 2023. For people who haven't heard this album yet, do you feel like that this is just a continuation of the Boats of the Grand Krieg, or was this meant to be like a new beginning and a standout for Ahab in a way?
I think it's a standalone, of course. I mean, it's another story, but I think it's the next step for Ahab. Just really because, I mean, if you're in the band, you don't recognize all this stuff that fans, for example, recognize in the music, like some differences or something. Because I mean, we're just us, and we only can play what we can play now, and that's just the natural development.
When you go into the making of an album, is there a preconceived idea of what you want it to sound like sonically? And do you go into the songwriting process knowing what you want the story to be about, being that literature is such an influence for Ahab? Or do you all need to kind of experiment with riffs and, throw a couple songs ideas in before you know what story that this album's going to be based on?
We approach the story mostly in more than one way. Of course, when we chose one book, everybody has to read it, and we do so, and then it starts. We have normally. Sometimes Daniel comes to me with some riffs or a song or something like that, and shows it to me, and I have something in mind as a story. Sometimes it's the other way around. I have something read, and I did some lyrics, and tell Daniel, hey, this one goes in that direction, and that's when he starts to write something for that part of the story. But when it comes to knowing where the album goes, which parts of the book we take, that just comes by reading, because sometimes there are parts that stick to your head, or that just jump in your face and say, that's perfect part for some great lyrics. Then you take these, of course, and you spin everything around that. And so it's very different. And sometimes even we have some parts back in somewhere hidden, and you read something and say, that would fit perfectly to this part, and then you put that out. And so it's very different, very, yeah, quite some ways to approach this.
When we listen to this music, like when I discovered like the books and the stories based off of your music. I discovered it like the other way around. But when we listen to the music, is this the feeling that you and the band like obtain from reading this? Are you almost like bringing your interpretation or your reaction to the music, or is the music meant to be very documentorial, almost basically just like a musical version of the literature itself?
Well, all of it, of course. I mean, if I read the book, it feels for me differently than Daniel reads the book, or Stefan or Connie, of course. So yes, I mean, it is our way of reading the book made into music. Then again, of course, you also try to take the book and do some kind of documentary, because I mean, the book is the star of the whole album for sure. And you try to do justice to the words that were written by Jules Verne.
hmm Well, when we listen to the music, because a lot of people, when I've told people about Ahab, for the first time. A lot of metalheads like who haven't listened to you assume that you guys are pirate metal, like a Swashbuckle or Ailstorm in a way, or Visions of Atlantis. Because with the Moby Dick reference, of course, everybody's gonna think that there's some sort of land and sea element. But if there's anything we've learned from the Odyssey, the sea adventures are not all pirates. But why do you feel like your style of music that we hear, some people label you funeral doom, some people label you guys as doom, whatever. Why do you feel like your style is sort of like the best style to address the forms of literature that you guys write about?
Well, I don't think it's the best way to address it, but it's the best way for us to address it because that's our language. I mean, of course, I mean, Ailstorm and something like that, at least for me, wouldn't fit any novel or something like that. But you also can do interpret books playing black metal or classic music or even just like 40 Wood Sun, just taking a guitar and singing. So it's not the best way, but it's our way to tell the story we want to tell.
And do you, when you read the story, does it almost subconsciously bring in new technical elements that maybe you didn't realize that you had before as well?
Well, probably. I mean, I think it's always a goal of a musician to play almost beyond your capability of playing that, because that brings you forward. I remember this one riff I play during Mobilis in Mobili was really hard to play when I was in the studio because there are some chords that I just never played before, and this was hard, and now I can play that stuff. I mean, not easily, but I can play it. It still takes some concentration, and yes, I think every album, not specifically the story, but the album brings you further with your playing or your musicianship. The books just wanna they wanna have specific feelings of the music, and that's probably that brings you further with your musical understanding in a way.
Do you feel like, like for instance, like the Bullets of the Grand Quadriga, which that's the album I discovered Ahab on, so it's going to be a very sentimental album to me. But do you almost feel like when you look back and you finish the album and you're going back to listen to it, do you almost feel like maybe you're looking at it from a different perspective other than your own? Like with the Boats of the Grand Quadriga, you're kind of looking at it from William Hope's perspective in a way.
That's hard. I mean, when it settles in a way, when you wrote it and you recorded it, and it settles like some years. I don't see it with another perspective, but it takes me back into that time because my lyrics always have some part of personal influences in that, and personal personal stuff that happened back then with me, and every time I hear that, it feels different than it felt back then. Back then, probably something bad happened back then, but now I can see it with another perspective because it's gone, and I can even some kind standing outside of all this and see it as objectively. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. But is it fair? Has there ever been a time that your personal life or your personal experiences were a subject matter that you wanted to address in your music, or everything from the Call of the Wretched Sea to now, you only wanted to focus on mediums outside of your current self?
No, I mean, probably not so much the Call of the Red Sea, but every album after that, there is some uh, part of personal life in the story. I mean, even though we interpreted novels, still there's some few parts in the lyrics that are very personal and still fit the story in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost seems because I'd imagine it's not like you guys are picking a random book off the shelf and like let's write an album off of that. There has to be a sense of you resonating with the novel in order for
Yeah,
you to create anything based off of it, right?
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not the first time we have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in our hands. We thought about doing that before The Giant came out. And it could have been that The Giant wasn't The Giant, but 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, But back then it just didn't feel right. And we took the other novel. And 6, 7, 8, 9 years later, I don't know, even more. Years later, I reread the book, and the others reread the book, and we were like, "That's it." So
But now with an Ahab live show, you are bringing elements from Wretched Sea, boats to the coral tombs. So when you were to sort of shuffle around your set list and bring in a song from different elements of your catalog, do you think that that almost alters a narrative in a way or brings a new layer of context than what the album originally had?
yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, life is always different. I mean, um, if you if you listen to the album, most of the time you do it as a whole album, and that's a journey. And if you shuffle the songs around with I don't know, playing Antarctica and after, as the last song, The Hunt, for example, which is a classic. Um, of course, it's another narrative. I mean, you can most of the time. I mean, our audience is not that much a mosh pit or something. Most of the time, people have closed eyes and are just like waving around, and of course they headbang from time to time, but most of the time it's quite silent in between the songs, and yeah, I think these people still get lost in some kind of story, in their own story, which is made from the new arrangement of the songs. Yes.
And do you want Ahab's music to be open to interpretation? Because there are people who may not be as into literature but could love your music, and people who, may have trouble reading or whatnot. Like there, a lot of people, your music has informed a lot of people on literature as well. I would not have discovered William Hope if it wasn't for Ahab. So like, do you want your music to also be open to interpretation, or for the ultimate Ahab experience for a listener, you want them to be just as engaged in the story as much as the music itself?
Well, there's beauty in both ways. I mean, when we manage to retell a story and the people get the story without reading the books, that's perfect. That's a big compliment for us. Uh, Also, when you reading the book after you listen to the album, that's also a big compliment. And same for a guy that's really into, for example, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and knows it like very well. And he still listens to the album and says, "Good done, well done." That's also I'm not the one who judges anyone by doing something. It's up to them. Also, the lyrics, you can read these lyrics in that way or in that way. Please feel free to interpret it the way you want it and the way probably it helps you or whatever. Do it. That's art.
Absolutely. That's the beautiful thing of art. It's funny too because I was interviewing Derek Green from Sepultura, and they wrote albums based off of the Divine Comedy as well as A Clockwork Orange. So like, there's so many different ways to take different elements of literature and express it through music. This is a very what if based sort of question, but let's say you were to go completely out of left field. Let's say you guys used a comic book, for instance, as a reference for an Ahab album. Do you think if you were to explore different categories of literature, that could maybe alter your hands with regards to how you make music?
Well, I mean, it would sound totally different. I think. I mean, it's not actually about being a comic book, but if the story is different. For example, I'm not sure if you know this book. It's called Das Boot. It's a German book. I think it's called The Boat in English. It's about Second World War and submarines around that. And we thought about writing an album about that. But back then, our sound was more warm and analog sounding. And we were like, we can't do that now because this has to sound industrial. This has to sound cold and almost a bit like black metalish, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, it always depends on what the story wants from the music and not the other way around.
Do you think the concept or art, because I've always said that art is life, and when you bring it into the world, it grows and it develops, and sometimes, unfortunately, it can die too. But when you bring art into the world, do you think that maybe the meaning and the subject matter can evolve over time as you evolve as an artist, or do you prefer if every Ahab album is more or less a snapshot of who you and the band are at that particular time in a way?
Well, kind of. It is a snapshot, of course, but I love if something grows, and I even love if people read something out of the lyrics or get something out of the music totally different than our thoughts about it were. You know, that's I really like that if people come over and tell you, did you mean that and that and that with your lyrics? And I'm going, no, not at all, but great. Then of course you can read it that way too. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's the beautiful thing about art. Is it better though? Because and I've interviewed thousands of bands at this point, and I'm sorry to all the other bands who could be watching this, but I don't believe it when a band says, "Oh yeah, we all agreed 100% on the making of this album." There's 4 to 5 members in a band. There's no way in hell you're all going to agree on everything. It's mathematically impossible. So my question I was going to ask you is, do all of you need to feel the same way about the novel and the album before, when songwriting in a way? Do you both need to feel a similar interpretation about the novel before you write together? Or could maybe you despise William Hope's works of literature, and and Daniel may love it. Like, can maybe having disagreements maybe add contrast to the.
Well, it would be really bad if I would dislike a novel because I write the lyrics.
Yeah.
So that would be bad. But no, actually, it is like that. If one of the bands says, this novel is okay, but I don't really like it, that would be probably when the other three say, that's a perfect thing for now. Probably the one would say, okay, then let's do it. But I couldn't imagine that, for example, me and for example Cornelius say we want to do that, that's great, and the other two would say no, that's shitty. I think we wouldn't do that then. So yes, everybody has at some point to agree on the book.
Has there ever been a moment in the Ahab journey though where you all picked a book, you all didn't like it, and you decided to pick another book to write an album too?
Yes.
There has.
Yes.
Yeah,
There has.
and you won't tell us which.
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, we had this idea for this album before we took 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, that we wanted to interpret a book that's about the slaves being taken from Africa to America, for example. And I I did some research on books that we could use, but there were very few about that. And there's been one book, and we all read it, and we all said this book could be so good, but it's just not good. And that's when we all said, no, we can't do that. We need at least a good book to write good music. I mean, it would be very interesting musically, because of you could do some blues in it and African rhythms and stuff like that. But it just the book was just not good.
Yeah, and I think it has to go hand in hand. I've always admired when other mediums, whether it be film, literature, visual art, that could always influence the music in a way. Could you see maybe in the future other mediums of art influencing Ahab? I feel like that there's lots of great, beautiful works of art that can maybe influence an Ahab album. There's lots of great films that could maybe influence an Ahab album. Or do you feel like literature is going to be your main source of reference?
I think literature will be the main source, definitely. But what I think what we all would love to do was a film soundtrack, for example. If somebody would approach us and tell us, we have this film or this idea for a film, could you do the music for it? That would be awesome. That would be perfect for us.
I'm going to start pitching you guys to everybody I know looking to shoot a film now.
That would be.
Yeah, I live right near NYU Film School. I'm gonna be pitching them to you guys right after I hang up for this interview. Being that you write the lyrics, but you also play the guitar, and that's your instrument that you play with Ahab Live. Does lyrics and guitar melodies resonate with you a little bit differently, or do you almost look at them as similar forms of self-expression?
I mean, no, I think that they're different, because lyrical art is, at least for me, more direct, and but in a way, it's harder to write good lyrics. I think I'm not saying that my lyrics are good or something like that. I'm not sure about that. I just write the way I can write. I think about my lyrics as small poems. But for me, I think writing a song is something more difficult and more, it's hard to say, not more personal, but it's more something that really comes from your soul, although that may sound corny.
Just because something sounds corny doesn't mean it isn't true.
Yeah.
I've always like the word cliche. I've always found to be sort of like an oxymoron in a way, because like people talk about cliches like they're a bad thing. I'm like, okay, but just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it isn't true. Like
Yeah.
just because there are things that could happen multiple times and could repeat themselves over and over again. Cliche is, I don't really think much of a negative, or and same with corny in a way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If you take one cliche and put it on everyone, that's obviously not the best way. But yeah, I mean, cliches, there's some truth to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cliche.
Absolutely. And the final question I wanted to ask you is to order to get that creative energy, in order to get that inspiration, the emotion that makes you pick up the guitar or a pen and paper, do you need to put yourself in a specific place in order to cultivate those ideas, or does inspiration just strike out of the blue for you? And kind of like two in one, are you always having the book present with you when you're writing as well?
Well, actually, I'm a guy that needs deadlines. And when I have a deadline, then I'll find my time to go and write something. Um, Most of the time, when I start out, I think, oh, this won't work. It's just too less time. But when you start, like, um, taking parts from the book and write them down, and then you mix them, and then suddenly there come these bigger images for a song, for the lyrics. And I think the same goes writing music. Most of the time, I start out fiddling around and trying to find something that interests me. For example, for Mobilis in Mobili, I tried out to play some really strange chords and some dissonant chords, and it developed, and then came out the middle part of Mobilis. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you just throw these fiddles away, but sometimes they stick and they want to be on the album.
Yeah. You ever worried that the stuff you'll throw away will be a B-side one day and just be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Many times we think this is one of the easier to play songs. These are sometimes the biggest hits. For example, Old Thunder is one of the songs that I think is heard most on Apple Music and Spotify, for example.
Yeah. Well,
And
oh, you're saying?
yeah, and sometimes the songs you think are the greatest are not the biggest fan hits.
I I could play four chords on the keyboards behind me, and that's every hit single that has come out in the last
Yes.
50 years. So
Indeed.
yeah, so before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for such an awesome conversation. I knew this was going to be a good one because any band that writes stuff off of literature is instantly a band that I'm going to want to talk to. Is there just anything else with the release of the Choral Tombs that you would like to promote in terms of live shows coming up, or anything else you would like to plug? And can you please bring Ahab to the U.S. one day?
Yes, we're trying to. You know that the big problem, we've been asked to play the US, I think 5, 6 times, but it's always the cost for the visas. It just it's just too expensive, and the problem is we don't have extended time. So I mean, we have all families, we have all kids. We just can't tour like 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the US, and we have our everyday jobs, of course, as well. So if we come over, we're gonna come over for 1 or 2 shows, maybe 3 shows. And actually, you being from New York, that's one of my biggest dreams to play Brooklyn.
And one of our
Sometime I'm gonna play Brooklyn.
there,
Sometime.
there is a stage at St. Vitus with your guys' name on it. So,
Yeah.
So
How big is St. Vitus?
it's a 200 cap, I think. It's the
Sure.
intimate venue. It's like the what CBGB's was. It's the intimate venue.
Perfect.
Yep. So yeah,
I want to play there.
yeah.
I think they even have a drink called Ahab, if I'm not mistaken.
If I have one drink there, I don't remember what I ordered, and I can never remember it because you have one drink there, you're gonna have 80. So so
Yeah, but
yeah.
yeah. I mean, we're trying to come over.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it'll be worth the wait. Maybe you should scrape some extra cash. Maybe we'll talk to Napalm or whatever. We got to make the Ahab boat, and that's how you guys will get to the U.S.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I will say that your music, it makes me enjoy the Staten Island Ferry a little bit more, I must say.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
Maybe we're gonna play there.
that would that would give 70,000 tons of metal quite the run for its money. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Ahab. Be sure to check out the Choral Tunes coming out via Napalm Records 2023. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.